this has been one of the hardest reviews I've done, and I've spent hundreds of hours listening to the Galion TS120SE tube amplifier that you can see there behind me. And that is because I wanted to get the review right and be able to describe its sound to you accurately. But a little bit like how a chameleon will change its skin to match its surroundings, the Galion, you can change maybe one sound mode and its sound can quite drastically change. So just when you think you've fully understood it as an amplifier, you make a change and then you see it sound really quite differently. And combined with that, it sounds nothing like how I expected a tube amplifier to sound around this price point. So it's had me questioning my expectations, questioning my taste to some degree as well. And I don't remember the last hi-fi product that did that. And for some review context, Galion is a company owned and run by Thomas Tan, who is the Thomas of the YouTube channel Thomas and Stereo. Now I want to clarify something to you straight away, because you might see this video and think, yeah, all those YouTubers, they all know each other, so therefore they all, want to club together. I want to clarify that up until when he emailed me about reviewing his amplifier, I had never spoken to Thomas before. So we have no connection at all to each other. And I also want to say in good faith that Thomas never asked me and had no expectations of me for this review. So everything you're seeing here is wholly my own opinion. But for some of the important basics, this is the Galion TS120 Special Edition variant, which is more expensive and costs $4,495, which is around £3,500. And the explanations of the differences between the normal and SE versions are detailed on the Galion website. And I have only listened to the SE version, so I can't tell you anything about the differences. And this is a heavy amplifier at over 30 kilograms. And you can feel the weight mostly being at the rear when you pick it up. And I assume that is a sign of some beefy transformers. And I do really like the resistance of the volume wheel and the clunkiness of changing between the different sound modes and similar. And I also liked the heavy all aluminium remote control, but did find the button layout to take some getting used to it. And I do much prefer the look of the Galion when you do this. And by this I mean install Shaoguan KT88Z tubes that can be purchased from Galion. And I preferred the sound of the amplifier with these tubes too, but I'll get more into that later. And the Galion does come with good quality tubes from what I can tell, two 12AX7 and two 12AT7 for the driver and input tubes, and then four KT88 from PS Vane. But the Galion can support 6550 and KT120 tubes too. For power, the Galion has distinct user-selectable modes of operation, Class A and Class AB, and both deliver different power as you would expect. It's claimed 30 watts RMS and 75 watts peak for Class A, and 50 watts RMS and 100 watts peak for Class AB, so some impressive numbers for a tube amplifier. Turning the amplifier around, we can see both 4 and 8-ohmed output taps or speaker cable connections, and 5 analog inputs, 4 normal and 1 home theatre bypass. And there is also subwoofer and tape outputs, which could be very useful to some. The next cool thing to talk about is the auto bias system. If you change between Class A and Class AB modes, you need to bias the tubes. I generally use the remote control for this, but you can do it with the buttons on the front. You press change, press class to select between Class A or Class AB, and then you need to bias the tubes to the new mode selected, so you press bias. And you see the LED showing you the automated process happening. And when the LED above the bias button turns off, the amp is ready, and you press change again and you're back to playing music. So it's a very simple, easy process that takes less than a minute. The process for biasing just the power tubes is exactly the same, with the only difference being you don't press the class button obviously to change that bit. So the whole simple, easy tube biasing process with the Galion, yeah, it's nice and simple and easy, which I think is reassuring for those that might be new to tube amplifiers. Something else that I thought was a great idea and will be reassuring to people that are new to these types of amplifiers will be this quick start guide. Just a simple quick start guide that walks you through some of the basics of getting started with the Galion, just again to reassure you with confidence. And this really helped me, and I think this is a great idea. So well done to Thomas for this, kudos for this idea. And then the last thing to speak about is an automated protection system that's built into the Galion. So it will shut down the amplifier for safety reasons or for protection reasons. And it actually happened to me a couple of times through the review period, which is quite startling because you're not expecting it. But I like it because it's safety first, a safety critical first system, which again is reassuring, helps with confidence if you're new to tube amplifiers, maybe stepping into, the unknown. Time to talk about sound quality, and this could get very confusing very quickly because straight away we have two different sound modes to consider, Class A and Class AB, and they sound really quite different. And then the amplifier has three different sound modes, A, B and T. So that's 6 different variables before we even think about different sounds of tubes. So this situation can be quite complex, and hopefully you can see why I made the comment about this amplifier being like a chameleon that can change its skin or really its sound to suit you, your preferences, or maybe just your speakers or hi-fi system. But there are some overriding sonic traits of the Galion that carry across all of the different sound modes and both classes. And firstly is, I'm told, it deliberately has a V-shaped sonic character. So more bass and treble emphasis than mid-range. And you might ask, why do that? Well, it can be a great strategy for lower to medium volume level listening, and I actually found a Galion to excel at that, at lower volume listening. And I know that's important to a lot of audiophiles, so this could be a great amplifier to consider. But that's not me. I'm a loud volume listener. And interestingly, I found the Galion to get very loud very quickly, actually, as you turn the volume up. And I wasn't actually listening quite as loud, I don't think, as I normally would, because I really didn't need to, because there was more presence, more higher frequency presence and bass presence at more moderate volume levels. So I wasn't quite chasing those aspects of sound as much as I normally would. And I found that really quite interesting. But I think more importantly, the reason for doing this is to create a greater sense of sound character and soundstage three-dimensionality, as the middle region where all the vocals, piano and many instruments live mostly sounded very beyond the speakers nearly all of the time, but the bass could come out into the room in front of the speakers, as could the treble. So it created, with some music, more extended dimensionality or three-dimensionality to the soundstage. But it's also a brilliant way for those elements to the music that are sat back in the soundstage beyond the speakers to still have real immediacy and real kind of presence and attack, and to sound fast and lively. So it's a real interesting mixture of a sat back sound, laid back sound to some degree, but also quite an upfront and lively sound. So it's a really interesting mixture of the two, and it works really very well across a very wide selection of music, actually, so long as the volume wasn't too crazy. I found it to work really well, and I wasn't expecting this. This is the bit that really caught me out, because with tube amplifiers around this kind of price point, you expect them to all be kind of soft and warm and lush and kind of gooey sounding, but the Galion really isn't that amplifier at all. And the treble clarity and how clear small details always are really impressed me. The sparkle, the intricacy, and the way treble details and small details pop, I think, is one of the amplifier's special characters. Treble details are always present, they always pop, and they always stay composed. So again, that's like a really big difference, I think, between the Galion and other tube amplifiers that would definitely soften off that region. And another impressive thing about the Galion was the bass delivery. It's really quite substantial, actually, much more substantial than I was expecting, much more powerful and enveloping than I was expecting. But the big kicker for me was the detail and the articulation of the bass was seriously impressive. And I was also impressed by the vocals delivery. A very clear, very open, see-through onto the vocal type of sound. But what I also found really interesting was there was some vocal character, I think coming from the Galion being a tube amplifier, but not so much as to that it was stamping a lot of its own sonic sound on the vocals. So listening through a wide variety of different music, the character of the singers, the actual big, maybe listen to male country singers or big female jazz singers, their own character of voice or vocal could really, really come through. So I think that's different to when you have a very warm, lush, typical tubey sounding amplifier that always makes everything lush and pleasing. The Galion's not really like that. I think it's more honest in its vocal delivery, but there's definitely more character there, definitely more character to the vocals than you might get with a lot of solid state amplifiers. But again, I think part of that is that V-shaped delivery and just the way, the vocals are set back in the soundstage, but they still have a lot of life. But this is one area where the tubes you use, I think, had a really large effect. And this is where I preferred other tubes compared to the included PS Vane, because I found the included PS Vane tubes to sound just a little bit too clinical in the vocal region for my taste. But the vocals were very clear, very focused, with a lot of energy, so that is still very impressive. But what happens when we start making changes between different sound modes? For me, the difference between Class A and Class AB is exactly the opposite of how you expect it to be. In Class A, the Galion sounds clearer, more precise, more articulate, more lively, more upfront, very, very clear and lively. Class AB, a lot of that goes away and instead you get a softer, smoother, more relaxed, more easygoing type of sound. So for me, Class AB does take away a lot of what makes the Galion stand out and special in the first place. But you think that might be traded off for a more substantial and powerful bass, but that's not something that I experienced with the Mission 770 speakers and with the Sonus Faber Serafino speakers that you can see there behind me. Maybe in Class AB mode, the bass was a little bit more tight and maybe a little bit more articulate. We're talking a tiny bit, but not enough for me to justify the other losses. So Class A was definitely the best sounding mode for me. It's what I listened in, 85, 90% of the time. So that difference is easy to talk about. More complex is the difference between sound modes A, B and T. Mode T activates tone controls, and we all know what they do. But with modes A and B, the tone controls are disabled, and I was told the difference between modes A and B is in the feedback and how feedback is applied through the circuit. So how do I describe the differences in the sound of these two modes? Well, for me, A sounds tighter, like the amplifier has a tighter grip on the music, and that means it sounds like the amplifier is behaving in a more linear fashion, which is very impressive in a lot of ways. Control, a tight articulate sound. But mode B, it just sounds like that tight grip has just been loosened off, and for me the sound is more developed from a boldness point of view. And also, just for me, there's a bit more of a relaxed character to the music. And I found the difference to be really quite significant and quite substantial. But choosing a preference between the two really isn't that easy, because once you adjust to how one of the modes sounds, when you change back to the other one, I was like, wow, I get all of this, but maybe I lose a little bit of this. So I ended up preferring mode B for that more developed, slightly bolder, more character to the music. But that was definitely trading off some of the tight control and some of the really precise articulation of sound mode A. So it's nice to be able to choose between these two differences, because I feel like these are the types of differences that you might be choosing between when you're buying an amplifier. Wow, I like the tight articulation of this one, but oh man, this one's got a bit more character and it's a bit more developed in its sound. So it's great not having to choose between them. It's great being able to have both in the same amplifier. To summarize the sound from the Galion TS120SE, It's extremely impressive in a lot of ways, and it's claimed the Galion is trying to combine some of the best bits of solid state with some of the best bits of tube amplifiers to give you the best of both. And I don't know if that claim is true, but it's certainly given you a healthy dose of what you expect from both, so I think it's an accurate description. And then we get into tube rolling. The Galion comes with PS Vane KT88 tubes with a C designation, but Thomas also sent me some Shagyuan KT88 tubes with a Z designation, and I much prefer the look of these, but I also much prefer the sound of these. It's a bolder presentation with more mid-bass dynamics, but I also found there to be more texture to the music, and I think just a bit more of a special character to the music as well. But there was a slight trade-off to some of that high frequency clarity or presence. It's definitely pushed back in the soundstage a little more. And we definitely lose some of that nice see through the speakers onto the music openness. So with the Shagyuans, the Galion is a little more forward and intense sounding overall. It just adds something that is that little bit extra special because music becomes more dramatic to listen to. But of course, this is very much a preference thing here. And Thomas also sent me some Mullard tubes, and these changed the sound again, with there being more of a focus on the middle of the sound for quality. So the vocals got even more rich and special, but the trade-off was for bass articulation and treble energy. So these were not the ones for me. But if you listen to a lot of acoustic music, or maybe just chamber music, or more simplistic types of recordings, then these tubes could be a great option. And now I want to talk about comparisons. My first comparison was with the Synthesis Roma 510AC tube amplifier, and this showed me how different the Galion is to the Synthesis, which is a very traditional sounding, super warm, super smooth, lovely, lush, pleasing sounding tube amplifier. So that's a chalk and cheese presentation to the Galion, and both of these amplifiers are around the same money. So if you want an always pleasing, always warm sound, the Synthesis is a great option. But if you want more clarity, dynamics, and soundstage space and more, the Galion is the better choice here. And I also then compared to the much more expensive Macintosh MA352. And despite being a price unfair comparison, of course, it's a great comparison because the Macintosh is a hybrid amplifier. So it's also trying to combine the benefits of tubes in the preamplifier with big Macintosh solid state 200 watts at 8 and 320 watts at 4 ohms power. Firstly, the Macintosh's big power was evident in the control and composure of the bass, especially the very deepest bass notes. And I could hear where they were just a little bit more wobbly sounding from the Galion, and they were rock solid from the Macintosh. But really the big difference for me was with the Macintosh's quite play it safe overall sound presentation, which is more about control and smoothness and then scale from that big power. So there's pros and cons to that. At normal listening levels, I prefer the more exciting sound actually from the Galion, but at loud listening volumes with certain modern music, the upper vocal region can start to get a little, just lose composure and a little shouty, whereas the Macintosh is always smooth and always effortless, again, regardless of the volume. So despite this very big price delta between these two amplifiers, it was a great comparison because it showed to me some of the strengths of the Galion and also some of its shortcomings by compare to other amplifiers. And I think that's absolutely fine given, the price delta, but also that is hi-fi. You have to make a choice and you have to pick, your priorities. And then what about some negatives with the Galion amplifier? Well, firstly, I think is practicality situations. When you use it in Class A mode, it does run quite hot. But I actually didn't find that too much of an issue here in the UK. But maybe if you live in a hot country, that is something to consider. I also found, as I mentioned just before, at very loud volumes, when you're being really, really greedy with the volumes, in certain modern music that I listen to that's being streamed from Tidal, and I'm thinking of Lady Blackbird, Black Hat Soul, that album, her upper vocals, because of that V-shaped character, could just start to lose composure, or maybe they're just presented just a little bit too loud in favour of the rest. But that is at a very greedy volume level. I was more than satisfied at a slightly lower volume level, and then that composure stayed completely intact. But that's going to be based on the speakers, and I suppose that's something else to consider. The Galion is still a tube amplifier, so it's possibly not the best choice with very low sensitivity speakers. Maybe higher 80s, 90 decibels plus would be better speakers to use with it. And then there is also the run-in period. I found the amplifier to need a very long run-in in order to sound its best, and I really did not like its sound straight out of the box. And I'm not sure if my experience there is typical. Maybe I had one that needed a lot of run-in time, but that's definitely something that I experienced. And then maybe it wouldn't be typical tubey, warm, soft, lush enough for some audiophiles, but you can make it more like that with the tubes that you use. But I really don't think you should. I think you should buy this amplifier for its main key strengths. And that's a great way for me to sum up this very long review. Should you consider buying the Galion TS120SE? Very much yes, and I can see why there's been a commotion made around this amplifier, because it really is not what you expect. It sounds nothing like how you expect it to sound, and its real key strengths, of which there are many, I can see really resonating with a lot of audiophiles, especially if you are a tube amplifier owner who's used to that soft, warm, lush, overly soft and squidgy sound, which is very pleasing and very nice, but it can be a little dull and lack some excitement. But it could also be a great go-between amplifier if you are a solid state integrated amplifier user and owner who's used to that more lively, upfront, dynamic type of sound, who wants to explore something new but who doesn't want to lose that part of their sound. So that's where the Galion sits. It sits really very interestingly and very nicely in between the both. So I actually think it's a fantastic amplifier that's held my attention for hundreds of hours, that's allowed me to change things and, you know, tweak things and change tubes and change modes and get different sounds. So that's been part of the frustration part for me from the review point of view, but it's also been part of the fun aspect of spending time with this amplifier. Just when you think you've gotten used to it, you can change it and make it different. And I just want to say, you know, well done to Thomas. I think the Galion is a really cracking amplifier. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful. If you enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you'd like to see more reviews like this, please subscribe to the channel.